Hello, welcome back to our Intro to Express.js. In the last video, we briefly went through the project we're going to build during this session and explored the basic functionality. In this session, we're going to install the necessary tools, get our environment properly set up, and get started with the source code. So let's get started with that right now. So first thing we're going to do is make sure your Node runtime is the proper version. Head over to nodejs.org right here and make sure you have the LTS version, and I think I'm running 8.8.1, I think, so we will find out in a minute. Make sure you have that, and after you do, open up your terminal and check your node version by typing in node-v. So I'm sorry, 8.9, which is the version I'm running. So I'm a couple points behind, but that should be okay. And once you confirm that you have an updated version of the Node LTS, head over to your desktop and let's create a directory for our project. So I'm going to create a directory called My First App, and that'll create this folder right here. Change directory into that, so cd into My First App, and let's set up our node project. So first thing we want to do is run npm init, which will create a node project, which is basically a package.json with a few default configuration options. Package.json is basically your node sort of configuration file. So let's go ahead and create that. We're going to go with the default here. Version 1.0 is fine. Description, my first Express project. Entry point, which will be the index for us as well. Don't worry about tests for now, and the Git repository. Don't worry about all these. We can just go with the default on all of these and confirm that your package.json looks like that. So once you have that set up, you should have a package.json inside your directory, your project directory, just like mine is showing right here. So now let's install the Express library, the Express framework. So npm install express --save. This save flag will insert the Express dependency in your package.json. That way, if you want to commit this to a repository, when you clone from that repo, it'll already be in there. So let's go ahead and run that installation. Okay, so now you should see this. And we have our package.json set up with the Express framework installed. So if we open that up in your text editor, I'm using Sublime, you will see the Express framework in the dependencies. So we're set to go with that. So now let's create our entry point, which is going to be index.js. So we create the index.js, which is now over here, and that's where we will create our Express server. So let's go ahead and open this up and get started. So here is our index.js. So first thing we want to do is import Express. So now we have Express imported into the index.js, and now we want to create the Express application, which is just a function from Express. And now here we have a reference to our Express application. Now what we need to do is define a route to respond to incoming requests. And as I said in video 1, the get request is the most common kind of request servers receive. So we're going to set up a get route handler to respond to incoming requests. So let's do that right now. So that is app.get. So here we are telling the Express server to respond to GET requests according to the following details. We have to insert two arguments here. One is called the route, and this backslash means the home route. So when we go to the home page, all requests will be serviced by this route handler that we are currently writing. And then the second argument is a function argument with 3 arguments inside of it. So we set up a function, and we're going to use ES6 syntax here. And the function in here takes 3 arguments: request, response, and next. The request is the incoming request. So from the browser, or it might be from a mobile device or some other internet-connected hardware. The response is the object where we decide how the server will respond to that request. And the next, do not worry about for now, but we will get to it shortly. So right now, all the important things are the request and the response arguments. So as I said a moment ago, the response is the argument we use to determine how to respond to individual requests. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send back a response. This is the response. So the response has a function method called send, inside which I can send back a string response to the browser or whoever is making the request. And now I need to actually run the server. So here I type in app and then listen, and inside the listen method I assign what's called a port number. So in this case I'm going to use 5000. So a port number determines which port that you want the server to listen on, and there are a series of ports that servers open up for requests and responses. Certain ports are assigned for certain specific functionality. It's a bit more of an advanced topic, so I'm not going to get into that in this case. But a typical local host port is 5000 or maybe 3000. And on the actual server on live production, it's typically 80. But for localhost, we normally use 3000, 5000, sometimes 8000. So this is a typical localhost port. So now we're going to run the server locally on localhost, which means we're only going to run the server on our computer. It's not actually live on the internet. So we go back here to our root directory, and to run the server, we do node and then the file, index.js, the entry point. And the server is actually running now. So if we head over to localhost 5000, you should see the response that we had just wrote in our Express server right here. So if we change this, my first Express app, I now have to go back to the terminal, turn off the server by doing Control-C on Mac OS. I'm using Mac OS. Actually, on Windows, it'll be the same command. It'll just give you an extra prompt asking, are you sure? And you just type in yes, and that's it. And then we do it again, node index.js. And then we reload the page. And then here we have my first Express app. However, it's a little bit confusing if we don't see any kind of confirmation that the server is in fact running. So what most developers, including myself, usually do is a console log right here where we make it clear, we clearly indicate that the server is running. So server running on localhost 5000. So now, if I turn the server off by doing Control-C, and then I relaunch the server, again by doing node index.js, now we get a good little visual confirmation, and we can test the server again. And that is all set to go. So good. So now I'm going to set up a couple more responses with different response types. So I'm going to set up a get with a route called JSON, and I'm going to pass in a function with request, response, and next again. So now here I'm defining what's called a route handler, so that we can go to different routes on the website, and the route, depending on the route handler, we will see different responses. So in this case, I'm going to send back a JSON response. And that's a different function on the response object called JSON. And inside the response object, we pass in a standard JavaScript object. So for example, if I do const and data, and just pass in a regular JavaScript object populated with whatever fields we want. So I can now pass in this data object into the JSON response, and this will render in the JSON response based on this route. So if I go to localhost 5000, I still get the home response, and then the JSON response will show that. And then I'm going to set up another route called HTML. And again, we have to pass in a function argument with request, response, and next as its own arguments. And then here, I'm going to send back formatted HTML. So we set up a very simple HTML document. I'm going to separate this as its own variable. And we're going to have it render a simple header tag. And once again, turn off the server and then restart it. And now we have another route defined. So we have our home route, which is the same as before. We have a JSON route, which is rendering raw JSON objects. And then we have an HTML route now. And here is the HTML response. And this is just standard HTML. So we can do normal HTML stuff to this. So for example, I'm going to assign a style attribute, rendering the color as red text. And then I'm going to reload the server. And then now we get red text. And this is how we set up a very simple server on localhost 5000 and render a few basic types of responses that are very common in web applications using Node and Express. Very, very typical Node Express types of responses. In the next session, we're going to handle dynamic responses by dealing with query strings and route parameters, which are two different ways of making responses more dynamic, more specific, I should say. And we can respond to those requests in a more dynamic fashion based on that. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.